was reappraisals in Vermont, right? So the legislature was hearing from a lot of folks who were really concerned about the COVID market impact. It's funny, we've now had a flood. Locusts will be coming eventually, I'm sure, but that there was a lot of concern about the CLAs in different towns and the impact of that very hot market. So that kind of put it on the radar of a lot of our legislators anyway. And then we had also, and I think the collective, we have also just really been wanting to do whatever we could to support the listing and assessing community, to get folks interested in this role, to support the folks who are in this role, and also to help municipalities not only find folks to do the day-to-day listing and assessing work, but also specifically the challenges we have in Vermont with finding folks to do reappraisals. Next slide, please. So then while they were discussing that, a lot of other pieces came into play. So we mentioned how the national standard is sort of 4 to 6 years is generally like IAAO recommendations. A lot of other states have some form of a regular reappraisal cycle, to keep the grand list up to date, keep the CLAs from being super volatile, create some consistency. So that conversation was introduced. There was also a lot of discussion by this committee about really trying to drill in deeper as to property use. Cynically, and I think partly correctly, it seems like they are very interested in taxing second homes differently or vacation homes differently. This has come up pretty much every year for the past several years in the legislature. It's really challenging for them to understand why we say it's not that straightforward. And property is taxed on its highest and best use. That may not necessarily be who owns it or what they use it for. And short of sort of, I don't know, spying on everybody and what everyone does in their homes, it's really not something that can be implemented easily. But they're really interested in finding out a little bit more about how things are listed on the grand list and how things are listed at the local level. There was also conversation about reducing implicit bias. So nationally and in Vermont, there is just a concern that we want to just be aware of, and we're trying to address in some of our documents as well, that there might be some like inherent unconscious biases in how we do valuations or the terminology that we use. So they did ask us to address that as well. Definitely not picking on Vermont in particular, it is sort of a national phenomenon. And then also things like changing the annual grand list lodging date from April 1 to January 1. This is sort of a high level of some of the pieces that were discussed. A lot of you were there following it really closely. Vala definitely followed it pretty closely. And folks were sort of updating each other on the listserv. So I think some of you followed along pretty closely. Do you want to move to the next slide? Okay. So then what actually came out of H480? So I think in large part because of some of the testimony they heard, this went from, we are moving to a 6-year statewide reappraisal cycle. It's happening immediately. PBR is responsible for it, and that's it. I think they realized that that's not the best way to approach this, and there was a lot more research we needed to do about it, a lot more conversations we needed to have in Vermont about this and what would actually be the best way to address this. And so they did sort of tap the brakes and give us some pretty sizable homework to bring back to them, which will include you folks, and I'll get to that in a minute. So immediately, and you know this, if you received one of the 99 2023 reappraisal orders based on the 2022 equalization study, they were no longer based on the CLA. That was an immediate thing they wanted us to change. So the orders that went out in July were based on the COD only. It does not negate any prior orders that were based on the CLA from previous cycles. It was just from the April 1, 2023 on, or April 2022 on. Yeah. They also immediately asked us to, and I do have a slide that sort of explains a little bit more about what the current state of affairs is. They also immediately asked us to incorporate some implicit bias reduction training in our Lister education program. So folks are going through the Lister handbook right now. We also did share some webinars that IAAO had available if folks wanted to take advantage. Because of the timing and the fact that Lister education has already been structured for the year, and also we do not feel equipped to create some training like that on our own. What we are doing is we're working with the Office of Racial Equity here in Vermont to help connect us with some national resources that we can then share with you folks that you can participate in, rather than PBR creating something from scratch. But that was an immediate requirement. Fortunately, this doesn't happen always. We were able to articulate that we would need help coming up with a report and an engagement program and a proposal. And so they actually gave PBR $50,000 to contract with someone to help us write some of the reports that I'm going to explain a little more in a second. So there will be a contractor who will be meeting with you folks, doing surveys, doing research nationally and in Vermont about what's going on, what's working, what's not, to help us then come back to the legislature with our report, with our recommendations. So we do have to do what they're calling, I think, a preliminary report or an update this coming December on how we've come so far, like what we've accomplished so far. They do also want us to have a schedule for full reappraisals for each municipality, like a cycle. So we are, and I don't know, Christie, you might have talked with Chloe about this more recently than I have, but we, at a minimum, it's not anything that's going to be held. It's just, they asked us to come back with like a proposed schedule. So it would be, okay, what would a 6-year schedule in Vermont look like? So we have maps that sort of show by year what the last reappraisal was, right? So if the oldest reappraisals, those are going to be the ones that we'd want to put first in line on that schedule and so on. They also asked us to consider things like geography. Fortunately, if you kind of look at that heat map and you sort of change each year, you can see there's clusters of reappraisals in different areas, but not always. So we are going to be working on a proposed schedule, which we will certainly share with you folks. We have not started making that, other than, like I said, just looking at our current status of different reappraisals and how old they are. That will be due in December, along with sort of a progress report. The only other progress that we have made, like I said, we met with the Office of Racial Equity. The legal team at the tax department is working on an RFP, a request for proposals, for the contract to do this work. That's honestly all we've had time to do this summer. There has not been any summer study committee. That will happen next year, because one of the bigger pieces is this working with relevant stakeholders. That's who all. So this summer it's really been, we are still working to roll out VT Pi and do all of our regular work, and then our office is also flooded, so we also relocated temporarily, either home or to National Life. And so this is what we've been able to accomplish so far, but we're technically on track. We're not behind on our homework yet, but I just want to make sure you folks knew there was not anything else going on. We will be hosting a structured conversation and planning with you folks and other relevant stakeholders once we get this contractor in place to help us do that. So a much bigger proposal is due December 2024. So this is the one that we need to come up with an implementation proposal for transitioning from municipal to state assigned reappraisals. And then also a set of recommendations and considerations for differentiating between different types and characteristics of property and their use, and then how that data can be used to make policy decisions. There's a lot more to it, but this is sort of the big piece that's going to be worked on in earnest next year is what do we want to ask for? What do we think they need to do? They have basically given us an opening here that we can come back with what we think they should consider, which I think is the right way to do it. Other pieces that came out of H480, they also, like I said, we also have to have as part of our certification programs, programs on racial disparities and bias reduction training. There is a requirement at a year in the future that municipalities can only hire assessors approved by PBR. This one should be pretty innocuous, that if the select board does vote to replace the board of listers with a hired assessor, they need to let us know. And then that the towns can also vote to eliminate the board of lister at a special meeting, not just at an annual meeting. And then this is a big one that I have a slide I'd love to hear more from you all about. I think we kind of did during the session, but that they actually also added a requirement starting January 2026 that even elected listers must meet the same qualifications and training as hired assessors. And that if you are an elected lister at this point in time hasn't, you have a year to meet those requirements. Next slide. Okay, so what's going on right now in Vermont? So that's a big walkthrough of some of the big pieces that came out of H480. So we sent out 98, I think it's now 99 reappraisal orders. Like I said, this is the first year where they were sent regardless of CLA results. They were based on the results of the 2022 equalization study. 68 of them were actually new, even based on just having a COD at or above 20%. 20 of them were to municipalities that already were under order, And then 10 were folks that were just wrapping up their reappraisal, and they still technically got the order, but assuming that they submit their updated 411, they hold their grievances and everything like that, and if it passes the 3-prong test, then their reappraisal will be accepted. So impacting quite a few folks right now. Before we get into this, Christie, is there anything else that I didn't cover that you wanted to say? Okay. Okay. So in light of like where we are and the title of the gathering, and we've got cookies after this, I promise. Like I said, you know, it started as sort of this like, and for those of you who were in the room or paying attention, it was very much at first like, this is what's going to happen. The state's going to take over reappraisals. You're all going to be on this cycle, moving on. And so we were able to ask for some time to do this research and to come back with an actual plan that was reflective of what would work in Vermont and what would make a lot of sense. So I just wanted to kind of hold a discussion, and I'm also happy to answer any questions about it. But I just think it's also really important as we come back to, because it's already September, we're going to be back there for the second half of this biennium in January. They're going to want that progress report this December, and then next year we're really going to work on this hard. Like, we do have to be realistic about what are the realities of what we're currently facing, right? Like, we're, as with a lot of professions in Vermont, right, we have a population of folks that are maybe retiring out of this, and if there's not a straightforward career path to get into listing and assessing, you know, preaching to the choir in this room, you know, are there strategies we can use with, like, I'm on the board at the Central Vermont Career Center, like, are there things we can, VTC, are there things we can leverage? Because one of the realities, I think, that is just a reality, is that we need more people in this field to do this work. What are the resources that we do have available to help us, right? So we have organizations like VALA, we have career centers, we have some state funding, and we have the facts telling us that we need the support. What do we need from others in order to face those realities? So what are some things that in this report or in this implementation proposal with the legislature, what do we want to ask for? Like, what's working, what's not working? And we want to, this is our chance to say, okay, rather than, I think I say this all the time when I'm at meetings with you folks, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. Like, we have a chance to be at the table, so we want to really be thoughtful about and united in what we do want to ask for from them. And so then what does that successful future look like? Like, if we were to sort of think about 10 years from now or 20 years from now, what would be the things we put in place now that we feel like would really satisfy the need? Like, what do we need to do differently? There was a lot more to H480. I'm happy to answer any other questions anyone has about the specifics of that. There's pieces in there about like sharing CAMA systems or other data systems, again, to get at there, looking for more information about specific property use. They are also asking us if we think the current funding methodology, which is, there's those certain per parcel payments that go out, is that the best way to do it? Yeah, there's sort of those components of it. And the bill itself, I think, is 17 pages. So like I said, this is a summary, but yeah, go ahead, Linda.
Can you go back a couple of slides, Terry? There was the second bullet point, municipalities can only hire assessors approved by PV&R. That to me seems confusing. Are they really talking about appraisers? Because there's a difference.
There is a difference, and it is very confusing to read through this and to sort of continue to make that distinction. But basically, the idea behind this is that it used to just say that municipalities could only hire an assessor who was professionally qualified. And so it's just asking that that professional qualification have some definition. It just says professionally qualified in the statute. So this is saying that municipalities should hire people that we agree is professionally qualified.
As an everyday person in the office, or are they talking specifically about reappraisals?
No, this is not just reappraisals.
Right.
So it's
Right.
all of that.
So one of the things that we talked about in conjunction with that is maybe as part of the VPA process, there'd be a VPA with municipal distinctions so that it would have even more like current use classes and things like that, and that might be something that would be an assessor qualification. I'm just spitballing here because we haven't totally ferreted it out, but those are the kinds of things that we've talked about. So we have to have some, what exactly that is, equate that to what qualifications you need. Right, and it was already in the law, it just wasn't quite specific, and a lot of people didn't even know it was there.
And again, that and this one, they were both trying to get at part of helping professionalize this, part of getting folks compensated to do this work, part of drawing people into the field is that there should be some sort of professional qualification so that it creates some sort of, equal playing field. Is there another hand? Because now I said
There's a bunch of
Who was next? Okay, go
I
ahead.
think Bill.
No, go ahead.
Regarding elected listeners, you don't know all the qualifications of somebody when they're elected. You're elected from the floor
Right.
at your town meeting. Without proper training, to meet the requirements in 1 year, you're trying to get people to get certified with the state program, and it's how many years are you? 2
Right,
years.
but note that this doesn't say at what level. So I think that's what's left for us to define where they need to be. I think that's part of where we need to drive the train and say,
And come up with a
that's
better
going to
definition.
mean VPA 1. And they can get VPA 1 within a year through virtual trainings if they work all the time and wouldn't have to just be sitting in, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing we need to really talk about and think through. And I think we need to be a big part of the process to really drive the train. If they're asking for it, then this is when we come to the table with those things.
So on the Political Act, what are the same qualifications as hired assessors? Do they have to be?
Right, so that's where we've got to think really carefully. Like, where do we put that assessor line? Is that you could be an assessor 1, 2, 3, and so therefore in order to be a lister, you got to be at least a 1. I'm again just spitballing, but I think we'd have to make it something that would be attainable and not push people out of the right. For me, that would be my goal. Make it attainable and not make it like. I mean, people are already. I don't want to be a lister and. I'm not going to the bathroom at town meeting because you're going to elect me while I go, right? So we don't want to make it even worse. And we've got to be really careful about how we push that forward and talk to folks about it.
I just have one question. I want to be able to have the selective answer. If you're elected and you don't want to do this, what's the ramifications? You're a local elected lister, and you say, no, I'm not going to do that. It says here, 1 year. At the end of the year, what happens?
Right.
You can't answer that today, I know that. That tells you something about the legislative committee that was doing this.
Right, and they did have because we raised that, the elected means elected. Their legislative council found that they could do this. But you're absolutely right. PBR certainly doesn't want it. We can't keep our head above water tracking the things we already have on our plate. So I think that would be hard for us to oh, you haven't done your such and such, but we can certainly keep track of, like we already do, everyone who takes our courses, so we can share that information. But that's a big question mark going into this session that I think is worth discussing. I think a parallel was something about clerks and Secretary of State election training maybe, but yeah.
I think it's, I'm sorry.
I have just a follow-up from that one. I'm still asking the legal question, is there any other elected official who is required to have qualifications to hold the job? So have we asked enough attorneys? Where is Charlie? Charlie left too early.
I think you'll be back.
It's a question that I have, and what would be the ramifications? I mean, I'm all in favor of promoting education for us, and I really wish the legislature had seen a list of how many of us have those VPA qualifications. But the other one to slip into there, where they've made it very narrow but very broad at the same time. So elected listers have to do this within 1 year. Appointed assessors have to have those qualifications to begin with. What about elected assessors? Do they have to have a darn thing? That doesn't seem sensible to me. They don't have to.
I have two questions. The first one is just to continue on with that one. Elected listers must meet the same qualifications as hired assessors. So if somebody's been a lister for 3, 6 years, whatever, and they get elected again, they're going to assume that we've got the qualifications of a hired assessor? Or does that person also have to have some kind of a training with a certificate beyond
I
that?
haven't even thought that far into it. I think once somebody's shown that once, then they can be reelected in perpetuity. But like Christie said, they left it up to us to say what that means, and so we have to figure out and work with you all. What's a reasonable ask that someone could, what's a reasonable course load that we offer that someone can take?
And the
That can
second
be
part
done.
of the question, I think it's back one of the slides talks about the state taking over implementation.
Yep.
Transitioning.
From municipal to state assigned reappraisals.
Right.
So does that mean the state's going to just take over assigning reappraisals and finding someone to do the appraisals for us? And if it means that they're just gonna take over doing appraisals somehow? No, it's not that. Okay.
That was a huge part of the conversation for the first month or so, right? So what will happen is instead of us sending out reappraisal orders each year based on the results of the equalization study, which we will absolutely still be doing as the equalization study, and we will absolutely still be issuing based on the COD, but there will be a 6-year cycle. And we've seen others, other places that have it. You can, once you have that cycle in place, you can kind of map it out for a very long time. And the idea is that then contract reappraisal firms or reappraisers can look at that and plan and be like, oh, I'm gonna pick, Barnet, Danville, and Peachum because I'm gonna be right there, and reach out to them. The idea is to sort of do everything we can to make it as predictable and anticipated as possible, so there's not this either feast or famine, or those firms can't hire up or come to Vermont or build those relationships because it might be 15 more years.
Because right now, we don't even know if we'll have an appraiser to be able to do our reappraisal in 3 or 4 years.
We're getting them till 2027, 2028.
We'll be retired by then.
Yeah. I think I saw Karen and then someone over here. I want to try to.
Well, I wanted to say, yeah, you have a very difficult job because when they say they want the elected listers to have experience, what experience are they looking for? Like they can just get in the job and do everything that you have to learn in 5 years? Or
But
what
see, for me, I think that's where we tell, we don't ask. Right?
Right.
We have the opportunity to tell them.
Right. You have your
Rather
job.
than us ask an uneducated party what should happen, we say, this is what needs to
So
be.
you're
That's
saying
where
that-
I'm coming from.
right, an elected
You
list-
open the door, now I'm gonna tell you.
But anybody that gets elected may not have any experience at all.
Right, and then they'll get 1 year to.
They get the
the
1 year.
courses
Yeah.
that we offered.
And that's where we gotta define
You
that.
get to decide, oh, if it's the
That-
101 course, now they're okay.
Exactly,
All right,
exactly.
that's, yeah, you
That's
got your
where
job cut out for
We've
you.
gotta be proactive, I think, at this point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay.
So many thoughts. So, one thing about the reappraisal thing is, going through the reappraisal process before being asked, one of the best parts of it was having the RFP for my town.
Yeah.
And choosing the reappraisal
Yep, same here.
company that was best
Yep.
for my town.
Yep.
And the people who, like myself and the other listers. And so I hate to lose that choice. But I feel like that choice might be gone because mine will be done in 2024, and in 6 years, that's 2030. But if reappraisal companies are out to 2028, and I want to keep myself going, where does that go? Because I had just gotten a reappraisal, and there's probably going to be so many towns behind me to push me out of the way, and then I'm back to 18 years again. So that's a fear that kind of goes through my head. And then for qualified listers, I hope that we'd also keep in mind is fair market value is a huge main part of our job in the grand list, but also is our BCA meetings and our board of abatements, as listers. And I hope the qualification I just hope that part doesn't get lost. Our interaction with the BCA and our interaction with the Board of Abatement. That part doesn't get lost.
And that's a great point. That was one of the big question marks that they asked this our report to come back to, because the appeal structure is very different if the overall structure is very different. And so I think we were able to sort of back them away from removing a BCA process from reappraisals. But that is one of the pieces that we have to talk about in this report, is like, what do other jurisdictions do? What would work? What would be an appropriate appeal structure? Yeah.
I got the money, who pays for all this?
Right, that was another one they asked us to figure out. So we do have the current per parcel payments, right, the reappraisal payments that go out every year. It's about $3 million a year, maybe, that goes out. They heard loud and clear, you cannot claw that back if a town hasn't spent that. No matter when you put something new in place, that would not work. But is that the right structure? Is there a different way? Because does that negatively impact towns that happen to have really small parcels but might have just as much need for, is that another reason why firms may not be able to come to the smaller towns because they don't get that much money from the state? So if we want to recommend as part of this, we can recommend all sorts of things. We can recommend like a base amount and then an adjustment per parcel, something like that, because some towns really don't get very much of that. So that's another thing they sort of asked us to come back to. But the hope is that if we thread that needle of having a regular cycle, then everything's happening on a cycle. The money will happen on a cycle. The reappraisals will happen on a cycle. Like, the transition is going to be scrambly and messy, because I'm like thinking about our statisticians, and they're going to have to figure out what. But at the other end of it, theoretically, it will be much more cyclical and structured, and the money will be counted on, and the timing will be counted on, and that would be a positive step for sure.
Are there that many firms that can do reappraisals? You're talking about doing 42.5 reappraisals a year.
Right.
And in some municipalities, a year isn't going to be enough to do one.
Right. I think we did the math based on how we're getting through them right now. There's like 16 a year, and under this model, it would be like 40 something a year. Yeah. So the hope is that, again, at the other end of the transition, if we have that cycle, the firms will have built up capacity and they can count on it. That's the hope. We're trying to make this more appealing to firms to do this, because I need help with hands. John. Okay.
Okay, I just have one easy one for you. When you develop all this, I have your master's assessment, level. There should be a way I can keep renewing that with courses to follow up on until I would be eligible as an assessor to assess my town, which I'm doing now anyway. But it would seem like we should have something every 3 years. You have to take this course and follow up on that type of thing. I think that's a very important part of encouraging people to get to stage 4 and then go beyond that to keep renewing that to help this situation where we don't have enough firms to do assessment. Because in small towns, listers could do the job. They were trained to do the job. And I hope that comes out of this. And not all out-of-state or in-state firms. And I think that would help some of the pressure you have to develop all.
But what if some of those VAs don't want to do that? What if they just want to get their certification, work in the municipality they're in? Is that what you're saying? But then we have to go and do reappraisals? Is that what you're saying? Or
What I'm saying is, I'm doing our reappraisal right now. I have a level 4 master's. I'm too old to do this, but if I were younger, I should be able to say, okay, I'm going to have, there's courses out there to keep me current, so I can keep on doing that.
Right.
And I'm not a reappraisal firm, I'm a town assessor.
Right.
So that would help do some of the work they want to do over 6 years in small towns if you have someone willing to take that level of level 4 and then keep able to renew that, and so you can keep on doing that.
So
But it's
there
going to
is-
be a nightmare.
So there is recertification requirements for the BPA program? And that's part of why they're having you sign those papers, because we're now assigning an hour for each of these towards recertification credit of that. So that is part of the process.
Sure.
But to be understood that the VPA at this current moment is intended for listers and assessors to work towards. And there's also the appraiser list and approved
Yes.
appraisal
If you
firm,
want
which
that.
are not one and the same at this moment. Okay? Just so people are clear.
And at the risk of a little blasphemy here, so excuse me, but what the heck? I think to get this done and to bring all of our towns up to date in terms of their reappraisals, we're gonna have to work together. And I know it sounds like, this is where the blasphemy comes in, sounds like regional assessment, but I think we need to drive that train ourselves as listers and assessors within our towns. I'm already looking at that because I know I can't get somebody to come in and do Proctor or Pollard with 700 parcels apiece. That's not gonna happen. We can't afford it for what they can do it for. But if I can get somebody to bundle my towns, and I've got 4 towns that are physically contiguous, is the market that much different in those 4 towns, one from another? I can still have my local neighborhoods in those towns. It's just what we're gonna have to do. So doing it by date that they need a reappraisal, I don't think is gonna work. To do, what did you say, 42 a year? I think we're gonna have to group them together. I mean, I've been trying to do that, and even getting that rolling has been difficult.
Well, and that's why one of the, and I don't know if I actually said it on
Yeah,
there, but
I
one
think
of the
so.
things they want us to include in that schedule is geographic proximity. So that we can look at that cluster and have, the date is one of the things, but also like, kind of makes sense for these guys to know that they're the same year and then let them,
Right, it doesn't mean that those towns have got to have one assessor. I mean, it's convenient for my towns that they do, but even if you didn't, you could still work together. I got a call from a little tiny town that has 250 parcels. And it's like, for the price I'm gonna bid that per parcel, you probably can't afford it. But the town right next door is doing a reappraisal. The other town right next door in the same school district needs to do a reappraisal. That makes all the sense in the world to have the same contractor.
But you gotta let the contractor agree to that.
You also get the towns to agree on
It's
that.
for the towns, I think.
I see Jennifer.
Hence the blasphemy.
So, I like working in towns that the listers can do their own reappraisal. And if they're capable of doing the legwork and meeting with the property owners and things like that, I can service a lot of towns at the same time as a consultant coming in and helping them do their job. I fear that what we've done with some of this is we've pushed that capability to the wayside, and we are not encouraging our local listers to maintain, get some education, some coursework, but allow those of us who, I could do 4, 5, 6 towns at the same time, kind of oversee what they're doing. I can do a lot of parcels that way. I just hope we don't give up on that notion.
Yes, amen.
John?
Hi, thank you. So I'm sort of an outsider, and I came here last year to speak, and I'm really proud of you guys for moving forward so quickly. When we just started talking about some of the stuff last year, and you're jumping on this right now, which I think is really useful. And I work in states where certification programs are very active for assessors, and I'm glad you're doing that. But one thing you haven't talked about is salary levels, and I think that needs to be really looked at here in Vermont in particular. And I would encourage you to talk to the state legislature about that, and to all these communities, the cities and towns group, to get the levels of salaries up there. Then what Ed is talking about, which is listers who are really qualified are paid well to do their own reassessments, and maybe with the help of a reassessment company like Ed's or mine, we can assist these small communities and give them some advice on how to do it, or leases. That's kind of the way to go. But I would really have you folks, maybe that needs assessment, $50,000 contract or consultant you have, that might be something they'd look at, the salary levels.
Yeah.
I know we looked at it in Burlington when I did the needs assessment up there for John, and his salary level was really low for what he was doing for the city of Burlington.
And that's a great, like, that sort of data set is something Val can help with. I feel like there was some Comp 60 conversation about that. Probably someone here was asking and it was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, they're basically volunteering their time to do a really challenging job.
You need new people, you're not gonna come in.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great thing, like come January, when we're in there talking to Ways and Means about what we found so far, is for them to hear from Vala or group of, here's the reality of what the compensation is. And so if you want us to take these courses and have this time, if you want us to have this level of expertise, you know, because the per parcel payments, that's another thing we've advocated for a bunch, is to try to get those brought up. Like, inflation has not even remotely kept up with those. They've been the same payments for several years, so it's actually a pretty big pay.
Some towns until recently were on like a $200 stipend per year.
Yeah.
Like, not even joking, for what we do. That's crazy.
All right, keep losing track.
How, in the state, how many towns don't have anything? Assessors or listers?
I mean, there's a couple that have gaps of time.
Well, in order to sign a grant list, you gotta at least have a lister
maybe have,
or
like,
two
one
per
of those
day,
listers.
right?
I know
How
Glastonbury, I
many,
think
like,
Glastonbury
towns
does it.
don't really, do you know how many towns don't really have a working
I know one does.
force of lister or assessors?
I think they all do at least to some degree, because we have to get the grant list done.
Yeah.
Whether that equates to one person, and then they get another person to come in and sign is another thing.
Or if they're just approving numbers that
Right,
happened, but they
right.
never looked or inspected, or, do you know how many towns are, is that a thing?
So we don't collect signatures, so we don't know.
It's a thing.
Did you have your hands?
Yeah, so is your intentions for this coming season, sales equalization and this period of, say, 3 or 4 years, if we're going to do this, to only use the COD for continuing orders for reappraisal?
Right, so, and just again, this is the legislature, not, like, we are doing, so the
Well,
legislature, the statute now has been changed, so we are not allowed to issue orders on CLAs anymore. But we are going to continue to do this study and let you all know what we found. But we can't issue an order based on CLA alone anymore, because this changed the statute.
And the CLA is still used for equalization, to equalize your grant list
Sure,
for
sure.
the liability to the education funding.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's still, that's its purpose.
So if we're in a town that we've been kind of going right along, we've kept our COA, we know that we're going over this year. Prior to this meeting, I was thinking, I need, in 2 years, I need to do the reappraisal. What you're saying is that I might not actually get that order. And so if I'm here in a town, apart from the penalty from the equalization from the CLA, why am I gonna move forward if something's gonna be dictated?
But if
to
your
3 or 4
CLA
years?
keeps slipping, what's your
Well, for so
COD?
many reasons.
What's that?
What's your COD if your CLA keeps slipping? What is your COD?
Currently right now?
Yeah,
17.
yeah, so you get there. You're getting there, right? And then the other piece of the puzzle is just because we're not putting down the hammer yet, doesn't mean you don't need a
I
reappraisal.
understand.
Right?
Right.
But if that-
I understand that politically, a lot of towns need the hammer, right? But it doesn't mean that you don't need one, doesn't mean you should start planning, because we know they're bidding into 2027, right?
But it's another year of the fee for the parcel, so.
Oh, I see, yeah, yeah, there's that.
We only have enough time for just 1 or 2 more questions. Okay.
I was just gonna call someone we haven't heard from yet. Go ahead. Yes, Ginger.
Okay. Is this information, as the bills are being passed and everything, is this information being conveyed to the town managers and the other boards? Or how is the information getting out to, is it just coming to us as listers?
Well, no, I mean, there's VLCT, they do a pretty thorough legislative, they actually update VLCT members weekly during the session to say, here's what's going on, and then I'm sure they did a pretty major roundup of all the municipal pieces. Terry, if you go back to the bill link on one of the first slides, sorry, and it got some media attention, right? But it is kind of like on everyone to kind of keep up to date, and we feel like it's our responsibility to talk to. So if you, I don't have internet, never mind, sorry. So I was gonna say, so legislature.vermont.gov is where all these are, and there's a search, and so I just always search H480 and I get it. But there's the full bill, which is 17 pages, but then there's also a really handy 2-page summary. And so that is also really helpful if you ever need to at any of your local meetings or anything like that, or you just want to have it on hand. Yeah, sorry.
You're not on.
But that is really handy. Just go legislature.vermont.gov, and then it has the search. And you can search Act 68 now too, and it would show up. And where it changed the statute is now updated. But then it has like the link to the bill, and then it has, and the way that the bills are written and printed out, they're underlined as new language and then crossed out as the stuff that went away, and that's helpful too to see what moved or what didn't. And then there's a bill summary. That's pretty handy. But no, I think VLCT, the Clerks Association, us, I'm sure I'm leaving somebody out. You know, we used Comp 60. I know I got the legislative summary out really late this year, but I was hoping people by that
What's
point.
the, is it MuniCert, what's that?
There's
one?
MuniNet.
MuniNet, yeah, and then that's where a lot of my management seems to
Okay.
get some of their info.
Because I keep hearing like, is it like rumors of my death are greatly exaggerated? I feel like MuniNet, people keep saying it, I'm not sure if it's, but we still send stuff out to
Yeah.
it.
UNet's a listserv that's provided by UVM, and it's open to the public, but specifically for municipal officials to
Yeah,
get their information
that's where I think
out.
they get their info.
I see that Charlie's back. Did we have a legal question we wanted to ask Charlie?
But then Lisa left.
Elected listers, what didn't have to do with
So
elected?
Oh, do they have to go by the statute, right?
Oh, I think they were curious about the fact that they made
Oh, the only elected official,
They don't have
that
certification.
is required to.
requirements of education on elected officials. And the fact that haven't heard of that happening before.
He's phoning a friend.
And if they don't get, you said if they don't get to that point in a year or something.
So the question is, can the legislature do that? Is
Yeah.
that basically- Yes, absolutely, no question about it. We do not have a legal right to our elected offices.
Are there any other elected officials?
Yes, the constable, constable.
That are required, constable, right?
Constable. But I think health officers too, if I'm not mistaken.
Health officers too, okay.
They restrict the constables what they can do. If you want to be a certified police officer, you must take the certification for police officer. Otherwise, they can be very limited what they do. That's what the constables are doing. So there is another elected office that way, but they restrict what they can do. Maybe that's.
And health officers,
that's-
somebody said too.
But I think
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
What if the town won't put up the funds to do another reappraisal? I mean, we've just gone through one. It was costly. Listers' money, listers' time, COVID, 3 years. I'm sorry. To do it another 6 years, I'd like to know where all the money's gonna come from. I mean, who's gonna help? Because we don't get much from the state, being a small town.
Right.
Well, so part of that consideration, though, was to look at which towns had recently completed. So I think in the realm of things, because of what we're looking at, even though maybe
They
it
go out
should be
further?
6 years, there's no way it's gonna be 6 years for you, because we can't even catch up with the ones that have been, right? I don't.
It'd be cheaper.
Before we catch up, it's gonna be.
Faster, it's less work for the company, so they would be charging less.
But what would be more important though, if you have a town that is, got a COD of almost 26% versus a town where a CLA and a COD might not be triggering, but they're 15 years since their last reappraisal. What do you, but the one that's at almost 26% just had a reappraisal 4 years ago. So how do you?
Well, they're gonna get an order anyway.
We did.
I'll be retired by
Right?
then.
So that one, so there's the two things. We gotta plan out time, and then we still have the orders that will take place.
So I do want to just add one more thing, because we're out of time, back to the point about the paying for it in the 6th year. So that's another very important piece of data that the legislature will want to hear. Okay, if we're doing this on a 6-year cycle, what's a reasonable, like that was really hard for us to find for some reason, was like, what is a reappraisal cost? And what is an average cost? And what is
It's
a
gonna
reasonable
change.
ask for the town? What is the ask on the town? So those are things that are like data that would be really helpful from you all to tell the legislature so they actually know what they're working on.
Can you send a copy of that?
Yes, I will send this to Elizabeth Current about the cases. I know we're out of time, but we will definitely be hosting conversations about this next year, especially once we get the consultant to start to help us with this work. And please do sort of keep thinking about like what's working, what's not, what do we need from the legislature, and what does this look like if we're successful now? Like what do we see? What does success look like in the future? And that might help us as well. Thank you all. Sorry, that went by really fast.
Thank you, Jill. That was great.